It should be obvious that we cannot solve a crisis with the same methods that got us into it in the first place.
This is a last chance saloon. Because if we don't really take the decisions that are vital now, it's going to be almost impossible to catch up.
We will end the moratorium on extracting our huge reserves of shale, which could get gas flowing as soon as 6 months. We'll give way.
If unprecedented changes are not made and made soon, there will be irreversible damage to the planet.
Zero carbon.
East Talk. Hello and welcome to Zero Carbonista Series 4 Fool's Gold. I'm Ian Collins and this is the UK's #1 environment-based podcast. If it's green, it's in. On this week's episode, the issue of free, clean energy has been solved and why COP26 was an environmental catastrophe. Let's speak to our man wearing the Don't Believe a Word of It t-shirt. He is the green entrepreneur and environmentalist Dale Vince. Dale, hello.
Yeah, hello. I'm actually wearing a poncho because it's so f***ing cold, isn't it?
It's absolutely... I mean, it is properly cold, isn't it? You know, when people go, it's a bit cold out there, it's like, well, it's not really. It's like 7-8 degrees. This is cold.
Minus 10, right?
We're in the minuses. Yeah. What do you reckon that's down to then?
No idea. But, I've got a heat pump heating the place I'm living in, and it's been catastrophic for the ability of that to heat the place. Indoor temperature 13 degrees, I had to abandon ship.
Wow. Does that compound your belief on heat pumps being a crock of shit?
Confirm, I think you mean, but yes.
Yeah. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Because the people in the heat pump HQ, one might assume, had tested this stuff out in this way.
Well, I think they know their stuff, but they're selling it on the basis of an average temperature and all that kind of stuff. But we have to look at absolute peaks. And this week we had warnings from the national grid that we would have blackouts because we didn't have enough electricity. And they got 2 coal-fired stations ready to fire up. And at the same time, I've got a heat pump and its output is disastrously low for heating the home I'm living in. And I'm reminded that heat pump efficiencies drop to 1 for 1 in cold weather. That means you put 1 unit in and get 1 back out, which means we quadruple the amount of electricity that a house needs in the winter at sub-zero temperatures. And so these, at the moment we're short maybe of a few percent and we'll get blackouts. Can you imagine being short by 400%?
Darn right, yeah. And I mean, you kind of did sort of warn about this, didn't you, before? So
that's right.
This is fraught with the landmines in this kit are multifarious.
And thankfully, we've got a government that can't do shit, right? So we won't have a national heat pump program. I think they're planning a few 100,000 a year, so it'll take us maybe 100 years to do the job or something. And we will have a new government in a couple of years' time. But that's the trajectory that they want to take us on, replace everything with heat pumps, and then need to build 4 times as much green electricity and make a massive grid upgrade at the same time. Bonkers. And I forget the cost now, but I remember it. £300 billion cost to do that.
300 billion.
Yeah, exactly.
Man alive. I genuinely was asking you to confirm that when you said it's at 300. That's insane, isn't it? Talking of the words 4 times, renewable energy jobs growing 4 times faster than the rest of the UK market. Now, that's encouraging, and that was always going to be the direction of travel, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I'm reminded that a few years ago, I think it was under Cameron, the government stopped reporting on the growth of the green economy because it was good. It was embarrassingly good for them, and they stopped reporting on it. But yeah, I mean, this is a great another stat that's coming out. Green energy, the green economy, they're simply irrepressible.
Not every story is quite so positive, though. But we've been in this territory before about animal cruelty, and this is about salmon farming. What's going on here?
Oh, yeah, we put a video out yesterday. Our friends at the Express carried it along with some other people. And it's a 4-minute video, basically. It's an undercover expose of the salmon farming industry in Scotland. We sent the team out over a period of about 6 months. They looked at maybe 6 or 9 salmon farms, sent in underwater drones, overhead drones, that kind of stuff, and just found the most incredible situation for the fish there. 100,000 salmon jammed into tiny nets, literally side by side. They've got no room to swim. In the bottom of the net, it's full of dead and dying salmon and feces and that kind of stuff. They're infested with lice. There are pictures of salmon, not quite swimming, but in the water, with their heads half eaten away by these lice, which they can't escape from, and all kinds of other abuse that we can see the workers in the salmon farmers, doing to the salmon. But
how does the person that runs this not spot it and go, this is probably wrong?
Well, I think it's all about economics. works. They cram them in the nets. They accept the mortality rate of 25%. So 1 in 4 of these salmon don't get big enough to be killed by the farmers. They just die and rot in the bottom of the nets. They accept that because the economics work for them. But they have to cram them in to make the economics work. It's a horrible, abusive process. And it's systemically at the heart of all intensive animal farming. Cram them in, treat them badly to make it cheap.
Yeah, and there is no consideration about cruelty, is there? That isn't if you asked one of the people that run one of these kind of outlets or enterprises, whatever you want to call it, that question doesn't even resonate because it's not a factor.
Not at all. And no consideration of the environment either. And what we also found was these farmers, so desperate to deal with the disease that's rampant from the overcrowding, are using formaldehyde, a deadly poison that's banned in all other parts of the food industry and affects the environment around the nets, the otters, the crabs, and all the other wildlife. Horrible.
Here's a subject here, Del. This comes under the title of "You Can All Stick Your Collective Windmills Up Your Arse," because the headline is "Breakthrough in Nuclear Fusion and problem solved for cheap and clean energy." It ties in with a question from Rachel, who says, is nuclear fusion the golden egg and the goose? I saw these headlines. It said problem solved. It's clean. It's free. They've sussed it. What's not to like?
Maybe it's more like Jack and the Beanstalk. I'm not sure. But maybe we should have a nuclear corner, right? Because fracking's running out of fun for us now, isn't it?
Solve that.
Nuclear fusion corner, I should say. But look, I read the article and the headlines are incredible, aren't they? And then they lead with like this. There's a source of clean, endless, baseload, low carbon electricity, and we're like almost ready to make it. And then you read the detail, and in this massive 30-meter sphere, they managed, they say, to get a net gain of energy for the first time. I think it was 2.5 megajoules in and 2.1 megajoules out. No, the other way around.
For about 40 years or something, right?
For so long. And it turns out it's enough basically to boil a kettle. You could make a cup of tea with it, which is great, but it's a 30-meter dome to boil a kettle. So there's some scaling issues there, and they can do it once a day. And the experts say they need to do it 100 times a second. So there's a challenge there as well. But at the bottom of the article that I read in The Guardian, it says, but they didn't take into account the power they used to power the lasers, which was 20 times bigger than the 2.5 megajoules that they say they got out. They didn't count that.
This, again, is one of those things where you might have thought one person on the job had gone, do you know what, lads, this probably isn't working.
But Joe Biden...
We've boiled a kettle. A lovely cup of tea it was. Nobody's disputing the tea. It was, as far as tea goes, it was one of our best. But, 40 years, one cup of tea.
And we've got to get to net zero by 2050. This tech ain't going to do it. But I think... what bothers me the most is the incredible headlines and the big claims, and then the small print that says, but we overlooked 20 times as much energy. Why did you do that, guys? And how do you think that's not relevant to the whole headline? Yeah.
Talking of energy, what's going on in Germany? Fears of gas shortage over there.
Well, not quite as bad as they are here. The tanks are still 95% full. And the story here was that they failed to meet the 15% energy reduction target, but actually they got to 13%, which I think is quite incredible. And before the cold snap, they were at 20%, but the cold snap kind of, wound that back a little bit to 13. That was an interesting story compared to here, let's say, where we've had no government program for energy efficiency. We're not saving anything. We're facing blackouts as a result of that. And the German politician in charge of all this said, you can't bury your head in the sand and try to ignore the fact that governments need to advise citizens to use less energy because it'll come back and bite you. And I thought, why don't we have politicians like that?
Yeah, I was about to say, that's the sort of thing that you might expect quite a lot of politicians to be saying on a regular basis, but they're just simply not.
No, they won't do it because they're afraid of being the nanny state is what the Tories are saying. I don't understand that at all. It's the state's job to protect people, and at the very least by giving them information about what they need to do. And last week, when the National Grid said we may have blackouts, they also said, but carry on using power as normal. And I'm like, WTF? Why don't you say to people, kindly try and use less energy? We're in danger of blackouts. Yeah, I can't believe it.
That's extraordinary, right? Lots of comment, by the way, about the salmon story that we mentioned a second ago. Many of our listeners to this are picking up on that story that appeared in the Express this week. Yvette on Twitter says, thanks for your support on animal causes. I have another scandal I believe you should investigate. How do I contact you?
Send me an email. maybe I shouldn't do this, but my email, you could guess it, is my name, dale.vince@ecotricity.co.uk.
Or the Zero Carbonista at ecotricity.co.uk as well.
Oh, yeah? Okay, there's two.
Yeah, there's like the official email, which you completely forgot to mention, Dale. So just ignore the fact that
That's so bad.
they set up an email specifically for this purpose.
Okay, my bad. Let's move on.
UN climate envoy linked to Brazilian deforestation. I see these stories and I always think, right, this is going to be one thing or the other. A little bit like you were saying about the fusion story. There's either going to be bullshit, or there's going to be something so horrific in this that it's worthy of a new Netflix show.
Yeah. So this is Mark Carney, ex-governor of the Bank of England, now some UN envoy, and also sitting on the boards of some massive infrastructure and investment funds. I think this one was in Canada, and they owned a whole chunk of land that had been taken from the rainforest. It had been clear-felled and turned into agricultural land, and they decided to sell it. But the story here was that Mark Carney's been going around the world saying that if you've got an asset that is a problem, that it's a polluting problem like a coal mine or something like this farm, then your job is not to just sell it to reduce your impact on the environment. You've got to fix it. And he's been saying that quite loudly. And then the company he sits on the board of did exactly what he said you shouldn't do. So it's just one of those big H stories.
I always thought Mark Carney was maybe one of the good guys. I don't know whether you can get to that high up the kind of economic chain and be a good guy, but he's often talked about it. Well, put it this way: a lot of people on the right hate him, so that you often extrapolate from that he's. I think it's because he wasn't very fond of Brexit.
Oh, he was probably a bit honest about Brexit. Yeah. They don't like a lot of that.
Yeah, and this is where you get Bob in Arbroath go, you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm thinking, hang on, he's the governor of the Bank of England. I think he probably does a bit, even if you disagree with him. I think he's... And
it's undeniable now, isn't it? We're seeing a series of reports come out from government sources. I think the impact on GDP is now looking like 4% from Brexit, which is a massive impact. It can't be argued anymore.
Here's a question from Barney on LinkedIn. Does the government wind U-turn mean I can install one of your Brit wind turbines at my farm in the Pennines?
Well, that would be nice. A couple of things to say about that. One is they haven't done anything about it yet. What they've said is that they're going to look at it. They will hold a consultation, but that hasn't begun. Second thing else I'd say, talk to your planners, because little windmills like our Britwind ones have still been possible. The issue with the Pennines is, of course, it's national park, but see what your council say, because they aren't big windmills and they can kind of wriggle through the cracks of government anti-wind policy.
Here's a headline, Dale. Daily Mail in meltdown as it reveals that COP26, in Glasgow, of course, last year, cost taxpayers £250,000 and it damaged the planet. So we've got to stop this COP lark because the Daily Mail has rumbled.
You've got to laugh, haven't you? And also I saw that British government ministers flew 4 million miles in the pursuit of delivering this COP, which sounded incredible. But basically it was £250 million. And the Daily Mail, they're like, oh my God, it cost a lot of money to try and organize a conference to try and organize Saving the World. And they think it's not value for money. Meanwhile, we can spend billions on the war in Ukraine, for example. We can throw away billions in PPE scandals during the pandemic. We spend all kinds of money on all kinds of bad things, don't we? £250 million on a conference to try and save the world? Chicken feed.
There is the argument, I suppose, the nearest, we touched on this on the radio, and a few people did say, look, surely, yes, sometimes you do have to travel, but there could be a greater onus and an emphasis on either non-flight transportation or just, Zoom calling and that kind of thing. Yeah. There should be perhaps a bit more of a focus on that.
Definitely.
That's not unreasonable.
It's not, and I'm not defending the government here. Far from it. I mean, Boris Johnson took a private plane, didn't he, from Glasgow to London just to go to a private members' dinner, after just preaching to the world about deeds and words having to match up. Don't say one thing and do another. He then went and did exactly that. He's such a funny man. And no doubt, go on.
I was just about to say, a funny man is an interesting way to describe an arsehole, isn't it? Funny man.
Absolutely. And, Zoom has definitely got a bigger role to play. 4 million miles flying around the world to talk to delegates about coming to COP. I don't think that was necessary. And I don't know why it cost £250 million to put on a conference either. But this is a government that don't really have a concept of value for money. But I'm still not with the Daily Mail here. I don't care if it cost £250 million. It's a pretty important conference.
Here's one from Diana on Facebook. I've long wondered why Ecotricity isn't a B Corp if it's Britain's greenest energy company. Right, let's do a bit of explaining here.
All right, here we go.
What's a B Corp?
Oh, starting with that. I'm not an expert on what it is, but it's some kind of certification. It comes out of America, and it's basically a company that comes in and checks you out environmentally and socially and all that kind of stuff, and gives you a rating. And if you win, you get a B Corp rating. So I guess the reason we're not part of it is that we were going for years before this came on our radar. We've already done all of the things they expect you to do as a company to get to B Corp status. So it kind of like was behind us in that respect. Yeah. Also, the name kind of troubles me. It's like it's like the B team, isn't it? It's like I don't get that. Why did they call themselves the B team?
Well, as soon as I saw it, I thought, well, I don't know what B Corp is, but I'm guessing there's an A Corp. But
exactly
apparently there isn't an A Corp. They just went for B Corp. So, these are not people thinking outside the box.
So we're the A Corp, and that's why we don't have the B Corp.
You were already the A Corp, so you didn't need the B Corp. Yeah. And I would imagine, I don't know this, but do they charge handsomely for their services to be rated?
You imagine right.
Yeah, that tends to be the case, doesn't it? So I'm not being cynical. Everyone's got to earn a crust. That's fantastic, but f*** off. Simple as that. Terry on LinkedIn, final one here, Dale. Fan of the podcast and former Stroud resident. What are your plans for the old tax office in the town? Could it be turned into eco flats? Tell us more, Dale. What's going on? Have you bought an office?
Well, yeah, a few years ago, we bought one across from our main building as we were running out of office space and all that kind of stuff. And we spent some time drawing up plans to redevelop it and stuff. Then, of course, the pandemic happened and we come out the other side of that. And we actually need less office space because we're doing more work from home and stuff.
Of course.
So it is spare. And we are thinking of doing exactly that with it, turning it into eco flats. That's the answer.
Yeah. And what constitutes an eco? There's all the obvious stuff, good windows, no drafts. But what's the greater detail on that?
I think it's about essentially being energy efficient, super levels of efficiency, good appliances, obviously LED lights and all that kind of stuff. Yep. A little bit of focus on materials as well, where they come from and stuff like that. We'd like to build low carbon and affordable, and we'll try and do the same at Forest Green as well. When we do get to move, there's room there for about 90 low carbon affordable homes, and we'd like to do that across the road as well.
Good work. Dale, we've got one more episode before we break for your favourite time of year. So next week we'll be recording the last one of the year, and then we're back at the beginning of January. But, now isn't the time to deliver your Christmas message, but I know it's sort of a sought after as the King's Christmas message would be. But this is not you just want to get back in the saddle in the new year, don't you?
Yeah, I reckon. I'm going to take some days off, and then I'm going to hide from the event called Christmas, which will be nice. Look, it's a time of incredible overconsumption, incredible environment harm, and an incredible amount of social pressure as well. Maybe we should dive into more detail next week.
Yeah, we'll use that as the kind of sort of the Harry and Meghan-like tease for the next episode.
Yeah.
Cannot wait. Have a great week, Dale.
Yes, thank you, Ian.
We'll speak to you then. That's it for this episode. Don't forget, of course, to follow this podcast from your podcast provider so that you get each new episode automatically. Leave a review there as well. As we mentioned before, email address zerocarbonista@ecotricity.co.uk, and do follow Dale on social media, twitter.com/Dale Vince, facebook.com/Dale Vince, also on TikTok and Insta as well.
Zero Carbon
East Off.